Right, good afternoon everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon and welcome to today's session focusing on the challenges of managing an Exchange hybrid environment. I can see we've got a fair few here today already from the UK and Europe so far, so thanks very much. My name is Claire Drew and I'm part of the team here at Essential hosting this session. I'm joined today by Michael van Horenbeek, who is a Microsoft Certified Solutions Master, Microsoft Certified Trainer and Exchange Server MVP 3 times now. He must be a very busy man because on top of those titles, Michael is Product Director for eNow Software, the creators of Mailscape, the exchange monitoring and reporting solution. eNow is Essential eNow's UK partner, and as we're seeing more and more customers needing to monitor Exchange in hybrid mode, we thought we'd invite the expert along to talk about it. So this 30-minute session is aimed at people planning or about to deploy Exchange in hybrid mode. Our intention is today to highlight some of the challenges of managing a hybrid environment to help you hopefully either avoid them or manage them. And at the end of the session, we'll conclude with a Q&A session with Michael. So if you have any questions, you can send them through on the question panel on the right-hand side in the GoToWebinar screen there. So for today's session, we're going to discuss what unique challenges managing a hybrid environment brings versus, say, a standard Exchange on-prem or Office 365 environment. Michael will also give some insight into what you need to look out for when troubleshooting hybrid environments, and we'll give you a quick look at the very latest version of Mailscape to show you how it can make troubleshooting that bit more straightforward. I'm sure this is familiar to everyone, but it makes sense to start at the beginning. Michael, what do we mean when we talk about hybrid Exchange environment, and why is it more complex than, say, a standard on-premise environment?
Well, first of all, hi, and the reason why a hybrid deployment is complex is because of all the moving parts, right? If you take a look at the screen, it's no longer about Exchange. It's about much more. There is a lot of components that come into play that have to fit together in a specific way in order to make that hybrid deployment work. Now, a lot of the work to set it up is taken over by the hybrid configuration wizard. So a lot of the complexity to actually get to a hybrid deployment is taken away from you, and you just run through the wizard to set it up. But in the end, you still get into an environment where you have these two distinct separate environments, one in Office 365 and one in your on-premises environment, that have to work together, that have some sort of interaction, like through the organization relationships for FreeBusy. There's mail flow coexistence. So there's all these Exchange components that work together in a specific way, but they are supported by additional components like anything on the identity management side of things, directory synchronization, which is a requirement for the hybrid deployment. And then, of course, depending on the type of authentication you chose, whether you use online IDs or you use password hash synchronization or you use ADFS, there's an additional infrastructure that you have to take into account, which adds up to the complexity of a hybrid deployment. Now, throw that all into the mix, make sure that the moon is shining at the right time, and then you get these hybrid deployment, which makes it kind of challenging to manage because there are also particularities to a hybrid deployment. I mean, setting it up is one thing, but then maintaining it over a longer period of time, and by maintaining, I mean literally maintaining the Exchange servers, updating the Exchange servers, managing these recipients, but also making sure that the environment stays healthy, that these coexistence bits and pieces like Mailflow and FreeBusy and all that continue to work. That's where the challenge lies.
Oh, thanks very much. So clearly, a more complex environment does bring some additional challenges in terms of managing it and keeping it functioning, as you said. I know you've got a lot to say on this subject, but in the interest of time today, we want to keep this session brief and to the point. So we'll just focus on a few specific hurdles you might face. And as you saw on the diagram on the previous slide, there are a lot more moving parts in a hybrid environment. Not only that, more teams overlap with a hybrid environment, brings its own challenges. And now there's also this new component, which is the need to monitor the service levels of the cloud portion, which is a different kettle of fish really for anyone who's used to a more traditional on-premise Exchange environment. I mean, Michael, you see these organizations face these issues all the time. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. So again, these are just three areas, problem areas, if you will, for Office 365. But I would very much like to start with the furthest, the one first to the right. The service is key, and that's a very important message to take along in a hybrid deployment. Traditionally, in an on-premises environment, you monitor servers, you care about servers, you make sure that your servers are healthy, make sure that you have enough resources, and by resources, I mean memory, disk space, especially in an Exchange server, and you know, when you go to Office 365, that is no longer the case. In Office 365, you couldn't care less about the server. That's Microsoft's problem. That's why you pay Microsoft to get a service, right? So they have to make sure that the supporting layer of hardware and all that is working fine. And you have to make sure, or you want to make sure, that the service that you're buying is behaving properly. Now, that's a paradigm shift for most on-premises administrators, because now you have to focus on the actual task that you're executing, sending an email, requesting free busy information, sharing documents, depending on all the services that you take or that you buy from Office 365. Now, that all comes together in that maybe hybrid deployment or in a full cloud deployment. But essentially, if you're the only person in your environment that deals with it, then that becomes an easy task, right? Because you manage the network, you manage the Exchange servers, you might be managing DirSync or ADFS servers. But in larger environment, when we take a look at these typical challenges of the hybrid deployment with all its components, then there might be a team managing Active Directory or anything that has to do with identity and authentication. There might be a team in charge of Exchange. There might be a team in charge of networking. And then it all has to come together in order to troubleshoot certain problems. Because believe it or not, in more than 50% of the cases, an issue in Office 365 is not an issue caused by Microsoft, but it is an issue that is self-inflicted. And those issues can come in all sorts of colors and flavors, because it could be a hardware device failure, for instance, a firewall breaking. It could be one of your Exchange servers in a hybrid deployment misbehaving. It could be that DirSync is down and it's not synchronizing. It could even be as simple as an expired password causing one of the other feature not to work. But then again, because there's a variety of components at play, you have to align all those teams and make sure that every team is aware which bits and pieces of that other team are required to make the solution as a whole work. And that brings me, to the far left corner of the slide, is that what we see, especially with Office 365, is that a lot of customers dip their toe in the proverbial water by going to Exchange Online first, which means that the Exchange team of the organization is in the driver's seat. But as I said, Exchange is only 30% of a hybrid deployment. It's running through a wizard and making sure it's there. But there's the DirSync component, and DirSync is a relatively new concept for a lot of Exchange administrators. But there is ADFS, there is synchronization for password hash synchronization, there is the high availability piece that comes into play, and of course the entire networking piece, the making sure that you're even able to connect from regardless where you are is also very important. So again, there's a lot to deal with.
Thanks for that, Michael. This pretty much sounds then like it's going to make troubleshooting a hybrid environment quite time-consuming, and there's a lot to consider there. So that sort of brings me to the next point, really, about troubleshooting. Based on our customers' experience with and what they're telling us about the challenges they're having with managing their hybrid environments, we've highlighted a few main areas that they often need to troubleshoot: authentication, mail flow, and coexistence. What should our audience look out for in each of these areas?
Well, first of all, let me start by mentioning that these are 4 or 3 categories that things can go wrong, but obviously there's much more than this, right? The reason why we focus on authentication, mail flow, and coexistence is because these are the areas where I commonly see issues arising, issues or questions arising in hybrid deployments. And when we take a look at authentication, it all comes back to the different options that are available. As I said, you could maybe have chosen for a full cloud deployment. You might have password hash synchronization, or you might use a password sync as an alternative or as a backup to ADFS. But the question here really is if you are having an authentication issue, you have to be able to pinpoint where the issue is located or what is causing the issue, because imagine this scenario. You have an ADFS server on premises and your user starts reporting in that they cannot access their Office 365 service. Well, chances are, slim, but they are, that Office 365 is having an authentication issue at the moment. Then obviously that's one cause. But what if your ADFS server is down? Then it's a self-inflicted problem, but it's an entirely different problem, because the outage of a component that is on premises now causes an outage of a service in the cloud. But it goes further than that, because, okay, an ADFS server is just a server, but what about network connectivity? So imagine that your firewall is misbehaving. Or let's not even assume that it's misbehaving. Someone made a configuration change, but accidentally made a change that it shouldn't have, and then now the inbound rule to the ADFS servers is no longer working. Happens all the time. Well, if that's the case, then you're not even experiencing an outage from an ADFS server point of view or from a networking point of view. It's somewhere else, but it is having an impact to what you see in the service. So again, there's a lot of moving bits and pieces even within each of these categories. For instance, mail flow, it's very basic. Mail flow is getting a message from A to B. But why is that important, and why should you be looking out for that? Well, in hybrid deployment, there's two types of mail flow. There is external mail flow, which means that you're sending messages to the internet or you're receiving messages from the internet. But there's also that hybrid mail flow component that sends messages from on-premises to Office 365 and back, especially if you have your workloads, and by workloads I mean if you have half of your users on premises or part of your users in Office 365. And the reason why that is important, or what you should be looking out for that, is that the hybrid mail flow in a hybrid deployment is critically important that it is encrypted using TLS, because that ensures that certain headers are maintained, that the behavior in an Outlook client is the way that it is, and that it is fully transparent for end users. So again, and the point I'm trying to drive here is the complexity in the details. The devil is in the details, especially in a hybrid deployment. So that's something that you could see there as well. But even more importantly is, are you able to send messages out? So I'm referring back to an issue that Microsoft had last year where everything was looking fine. People were sending messages through Outlook and they thought life was happy, but the messages never got to their destination because they were queued on the back end. Now, in a purely on-premises environment, you would catch that right away because you have access to the queues, you can see the queues piling up, and you can start troubleshooting before your users start complaining. But in Office 365, you do not have access to those queues. The only way to kind of figure out whether or not Mailflow is still working is by sending a test message and then verifying that the test message is actually received. And that's how we helped some of our customers early on detect that they were having Mailflow issues last year, whereas the service dashboard in Office 365 only got updated 3 or 4 hours after the fact. So again, there is that little nuance, that little change between on-premises and the cloud that can have a huge impact. Then last but not least, in a hybrid deployment, there is the coexistence. Of course, Mailflow is some sort of coexistence as well, but what I'm referring to is the ability to query a user's calendar, request free busy information between both premises, right? And there are components in Exchange or an organization relationship or an intra-organization connector, if you're using OAuth, that come into play here. And it's very important to monitor those as well. And the reason why that is it's a highly visible problem. Is it life-threatening in the sense that your entire environment goes down if they can't query free busy information? No. But it is something that users can see right away, and it's something that typically generates lots of calls as well. So about being proactive about it helps you communicate if there are issues, or helps you to be prepared in case there is a problem, or helps you to be proactive about it and troubleshoot it ahead of time before your users even get to the help desk. So again, 3 areas, lots of things that could go wrong. And that's also why we kind of picked these here, because they're really critically important to a hybrid deployment.
Thanks, Michael. Well, let's take a quick look then at how Mailscape might actually help in troubleshooting some of these areas in a more practical sense. I mean, just a bit of background for anyone who's not familiar with Mailscape so far, and Michael's involvement with it, but it was born out of Enow's experience in architecting exchange environments for their customers. And that's all well and good. Architecting it's one thing, keeping it running over the lifetime of an environment is another. And Enow found that customers kept returning and asking for more help in maintaining their environments. So they started pouring their knowledge and their scripts and whatnot into Mailscape, and it's sort of grown out into a whole suite of products since then. So it's unique in that it's been designed from the ground up by Exchange admins, and they know how important it is to only present the information that's relevant so you can get on with your jobs without wading through piles of alerts and false positives. I mean, since then, Enow have grown Mailscape into a whole suite of solutions to help manage Link, SharePoint, AD, and continue to bring on board MVPs and experts in their fields, like Michael, to make sure the solutions develop in the best way possible and using this kind of knowledge, which is great. We need to see more of that, I think, in software development. I'll stop talking now and let Michael show us a quick example of how Mailscape can actually help drill down and troubleshoot into some of these issues. We're just switching to the demo system now. You should see that. Michael, I think you have control.
I do. Thank you for that. So what you can see here on the dashboard is the Office 365 solution. And before I dive into what we technically do to monitor Office 365 or monitor your service in Office 365, I just want to highlight the way the dashboard works is we have a traffic light system where green means you're safe, you can continue doing whatever you're doing, or go enjoy the sun. Yellow means there is a warning. A warning could be anything from there is things going wrong, there is something about to go really bad, but it's something that needs your attention, maybe not your immediate attention, but something that you should take a look at whenever you have time. Red, on the other hand, means it's broken. There is something not working, it's causing an outage, it's causing a service interruption, and it needs your immediate attention right away. Now, the way that we've architected our Office 365 solution is we took the supporting services, and by supporting services I mean the network layer. That's a very important part. We took directory and authentication, as you can see here on the dashboard, and then we took all the services, and by all the services I mean the three main services that make up Office 365, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Link Online. And for each of these services, we are testing the service by means of doing a synthetic transaction. Again, we don't have access to how much memory is consumed on the servers, and we don't care. We just want to make sure that whatever we're trying to do, whether it is sending a message, whether it is querying FreeBSD information, that it works. And if possible, we want to measure how long it took to do a certain action so that we know if the service is degraded. So if you're used to being able to do something in 50 milliseconds and now it takes 1.5 seconds, then there's clearly something wrong. Whether or not that change is caused by Office 365, that's a different question at that time. And then last but not least, we also have a configuration part where we take a look at all sorts of supporting configuration items like, do we have access to the admin portal? Do we have access to your remote PowerShell? How are you doing on licenses? Do you have enough licenses left in the subscriptions that you have bought in Office 365? And we also monitor certificates. Now, certificates are important for a variety of reasons, and even though I like to think about certificates being easy, a lot of environments have issues with certificates for a variety of reasons, and one very, very common problem with certificates is they expire, and people forget about expiring certificates, and then all hell breaks loose the day that they expire. So that's why we allow you to specify a bunch of endpoints in Office 365 in your on-premises environment, and what we will do is we will bind to that endpoint. We read the certificate, we read until when it's still valid, and then report on that. You can set thresholds, and if a certain threshold is exceeded, for instance 30 days before the certificate expires, we'll throw a warning, and if it's less than 5 days, we'll actually start throwing a critical warning on the dashboard. But it's all configurable, and it helps tailoring the solution to your environment, because some environments need 5 days to order new certificates, and in some environments it takes 90 days. So of course that provides some value to the supporting services, and then When we take a look at the functionality in Office 365, really important here is directory and authentication. What we do there is we take a look at directory synchronization, and in directory synchronization, which supports DIRSync or AAD-Sync. We take a look at the server, so we make sure that the server is healthy. But from a functionality point of view, what we actually do is we do a synthetic transaction. We modify an attribute on premises, and then we wait until sync has appeared. Then we go to Azure Active Directory, and we read that attribute. If it changed, then we know for sure that DIRSync worked. If it didn't change, then chances are that DIRSync isn't working. The reason why I'm saying chances are is because we're just using a single object. Maybe that object didn't get synchronized in Office 365. So in addition to this synthetic transaction, we also take a look at the synchronization activity, so the run history. We pull the run history from the DIRSync server, and we verify whether or not it was a success with errors, or completed with errors, or a failure, and we will take that into account when generating a warning or generating a critical error. That way you immediately know what kind of issue you're facing with, and it prevents you from having to log on to the DIRSync server, opening the service manager, and having to take a look at yourself. So that's what we are trying to be, as a sort of one-stop shop as well, to help you troubleshoot and reduce the mean time between failure and resolution of the problem. Now, when we go back to a few layers above, we also have that ADFS piece. And for ADFS, we monitor the ADFS service, and we monitor the functionality as well. Now, the way that we monitor functionality is we do a bunch of synthetic transactions again. We make sure that we can get the ADFS metadata, and we try and get a token from the ADFS server. If that works, we assume the ADFS server is working. Now, in the ideal world, the scenario ends here. We got a token from your ADFS server, and everything is okay. However, chances are that your users are not in the office and they're connecting from elsewhere, which means that your ADFS server has to be externally available. So one of the things that we do there is we have our Office 365 remote suite, which is by default in our solution, and it's a web service running on the internet, and it's testing your environment as well. So it's doing an inbound test to ADFS to make sure that you can have that correlation between, am I facing an internal issue, am I facing an external issue, so that you know where to start troubleshooting. Good example here would be if your ADFS server is down, then I would expect both the on-premises test and the remote test to fail because they're testing the same way. However, if your firewall is having an issue, then the on-premises test might still succeed because the web server is typically sitting in the same data center as the ADFS servers, but the external connections will actually fail. So by taking a look at the dashboard and correlating the data that you see there, you immediately know, hey, it's not an ADFS issue, it's probably a networking issue. So you reduce the time to find the root cause of the issue. Taking a look at the various services in Office 365, there is a myriad of things that we do there. Just to give you a rundown from a higher level, for Exchange Online, what we do is we test all the different protocols or the ways of interacting with Exchange Online. We do an OAuth logon. We make sure that ActiveSync is working properly. For Outlook, we're looking at MAPI HTTP, RPC over HTTP. We're doing an auto discover test, and we're also doing a mail flow test. So as I said a few slides back, that mail flow is simple but very critical. What we do is we do send a message to the internet and receive it back. And we also test hybrid mail flow, which means that we're sending messages from the on-premises environment to the hybrid counterparties in Office 365 and back, and we make sure that all the headers that need to be there are there. Similarly, for SharePoint, what we're planning on doing there is testing document libraries, which will be available shortly. And for Link Online today, what we do is we monitor the DNS configuration for Link Online tenants. As we move into newer versions of this solution, we're continuously adding more and more tests by listening, from feedback from our customers, and also by talking to MVPs, subject matter experts, giving their idea about what we should monitor as well. I realize this is a very, very high-level overview of what we're doing, and I'm flying through it at a real high speed, but at least it gives you an idea of what we are doing with the solution. And if you're interested, I'm more than sure that the Essentials team will be able to help you with any questions you have.
Thank you, Michael. I know it's probably the hardest subject to try and distill down into a 30-minute session, so I do appreciate it. We've had a couple of questions, but I think actually two of them have been covered by what you've mentioned already about testing external mail flow in the cloud and coverage over ADFS. So I'm just going to mention the third question, which was the previously in the slide you mentioned the Microsoft outage. How would Mailscape help alert to that?
Well, it's a very good question. So the way that we caught the outage last year is that in our dashboard, the Exchange Online test, they would actually fail. So everything else might still be green, but the Exchange Online test, and more specifically, the mail flow test would fail, because what we're doing there is, as I said earlier, we're sending a message to the internet, we're waiting for a reply, it's some sort of auto reply for the message to come back. A very simple test. What happens, that test is run every so often, every few minutes. And as soon as we, don't get a message back within a certain time frame, and that time frame can be configured. So if it typically takes 2 minutes for a message to arrive back, then set the thresholds to 2 or 3 minutes. But in this case, we noticed that for within, let's say, 10 minutes, we didn't get a reply back, which isn't normal because email delivery is pretty quick. So the way that we were able to determine there is an outage in Office 365 is just by doing that simple test. Now, there's multiple ways that things could go wrong in the service. I remember it wasn't in Office 365, but I do believe it was an Azure outage, where they forgot to renew a certificate. So if that would ever happen, imagine they forget to renew the SSL certificate, and it happened to Google not so long ago, so there's no way of telling whether or not it can happen to Microsoft, but it can. What would happen is that any test that relies on being able to set up a HTTPS connection to Office 365 would turn up red in the dashboard. So you would see the configuration certificate issues be red, so the certificates part would show up red and tell you, hey, the endpoint that we're monitoring here, Outlook Office365.com, the certificate expired. You would see the same thing for the Exchange Online tests, because AutoDiscover, Outlook Anywhere, all those tests require HTTPS connections. Those would fail. But all the other services like networking would work fine. Directory and authentication would work fine. So again, it's by correlating the data that you see on the dashboard that you can figure out an outage in Office 365.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, you've done all the talking today, so I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thanks to everyone who's taken the time to join us today. I hope you found it useful. As we've mentioned, we tried to keep this session short and sweet because we know you're busy people, but what we have got is some links to some further resources, which includes access to a webinar session by Michael for the recent Exchange conference online, ExchangeCon, which goes into some of the challenges and areas that you might want to monitor in a hybrid deployment in a lot more information. If you like what you see with the Mailscape trial, there's also the opportunity here to take a look at it free of charge for 21 days. It's the full product. And there's also the online simulator, which we found has been very popular with people who just want to take a look around in their own time but don't necessarily want to download and install anything. So we'll send these this webinar out, and we'll send these useful links out in an email to follow up in the next day or so. And we'll also send an extra link. The email blog this afternoon just published has an article by Michael around whether hybrid deployment is the right way to go for your organisation, so it's well worth a read. And this is the second in a series of a few webinars that we've essentially been running around some of the challenges in moving to an Office 365 or hybrid environment. And our third webinar is on June the 11th, and it will be around migrating your journal archives to Office 365, so legacy journal archives. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much again, Michael. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon.
Thanks.
And thanks to everyone who's come along. Cheers.
Thanks. Yes, bye.
Bye.